On October 11th, 1997, the Fairbanks, Alaska Police Department responded to a report of a young boy laying unresponsive on the corner of 9th and Barnett Street just before 3 a.m. He'd been severely beaten, kicked, and stomped on, and was bloodied and unconscious. Shoe prints were visible on his face. Police had no idea who this kid was. Later that morning, police provided a photo of that boy to the local news station KTVF to air in hopes of finding out his identity, and that young victim was soon identified as 15-year-old John Hartman. You've kind of heard a little bit about what this story is. We already know there's 4 men who were convicted of this crime, spent years in prison, and then are eventually exonerated, which is very recent in the last couple of years. What I think is really unique and interesting about this story is how that happened, and the fact that for nearly 20 years that these guys were in prison, there was never a moment when there wasn't this huge rally cry of these guys are innocent. Like, how can these people be in prison? And that's really why they ended up getting exonerated, that just people for almost 20 years continued to raise such a stink about this and just would not relent. And more people joined that eventually, the system, the court system you couldn't deny it anymore. They had to own up for mistakes that they'd made. And what I think is interesting is, aside from that, just how this case actually came together, how these guys were arrested and charged and made it through the court system when you look at the evidence, and you'll see what I mean. So at approximately 4:30 a.m. that same morning, police are called to break up a party at the Alaska Motor Inn. Several people, including 17-year-old Eugene Vent, are detained. 30 minutes later, Vent is being interrogated by police. They question him for 11 hours straight about the victim, John Hartman, while he's still heavily intoxicated from the night before, having a blood alcohol of 0.158. Now, legal intoxication is 0.08. This is a 17-year-old with 0.158. I want you to think about that. How inebriated, how drunk you have to be with that high of a blood alcohol level. Especially as a 17-year-old.
Yeah. Being
questioned about a murder while being intoxicated to that level, and as a minor without your parents present. So that's like red flag number 1 in this case.
It's like red flag number 1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and 3, yeah. Police lie and tell Vent, they tell him that they found a bloody shoe print matching his at the crime scene. But Vent denies any involvement and asks to go home numerous times. At one point during the interrogation, Vent did, however, make incriminating statements. Later that same afternoon, 20-year-old George Freese checks himself into the ER due to an injury to his foot while drinking heavily the night before. The nurse who tends to Freese's foot is the same who tended to the victim earlier that same day. She calls police and they begin to interrogate Freese while he's in the hospital. Freese maintains that he has no knowledge of the crime that took place hours before, but states that he was blackout drunk and couldn't remember much. But police, as with Eugene Vent, begin telling him they have witnesses and evidence placing him at the crime scene as well. Which, that's kind of like a common thing, right? And I'm okay with that. You try to trip them up and get them to confess. If somebody is guilty of a crime like murder, they're going to lie to you. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not, did you kill him? Yeah. Shit, wait, what? It's not going to happen.
We've got the 3 other guys, and if you want the best deal, if you don't confess, kind of things is a common technique.
Yeah.
And it leads to some things like false confessions and all kinds of stuff that we've never really.
You've heard 2 of these.
Yep.
2 of these guys so far, both completely blackout drunk. Marvin Roberts is visited at his home by police after his name was given by Freese. He denies any involvement, and Roberts was the only suspect who was sober the night before, from what I could find. So these guys, all 3 of those guys have said, I have no idea what you're talking about. 19-year-old Kevin Pease, the 4th, also was questioned that same day and denies knowing anything about this, having any knowledge or any role in the attack on this victim. The day after the attack, on October 12th, 15-year-old John Hartman succumbed to his injuries and passed away, now officially making this a murder investigation because, up to that point, and I think he was comatose. I mean, you're talking a day. I mean, I think when they found him, he was unconscious. Had been laying out in the cold for 2 or 3 hours until he was found. So, they didn't get any information out of him, unfortunately, before he passed. In the days following Hartman's death, police began aggressively interrogating alibi witnesses, many of whom were young teens without their parents present at the time they were questioned. Another no-no in my book. Several did provide alibis for the 4 suspects, but charges were still brought against them for murder, and they were in court by October 21st to present their pleas. All 4 men pled not guilty. And, I mean, you look at the 21st of October, they're in court. The murder was on, the 11th. Really, the attack was on the 11th. So within 24 hours, they had 4 suspects identified. And not even 2 weeks later, they're in court.
It takes a lot of stones to be able to walk 4 guys into court like that, them all plead not guilty, and still move this thing forward.
And hang your hat on
Right.
these 4 guys being guilty. Yeah.